Why am I wearing cat ears? I don't know. I saw them sitting in front of me because this is where I do my makeup, and I use this headband to keep my hair on my face, and I just felt the urge to put them on. So I'm gonna roll with it. I guess it kind of goes with the earrings. Hey all, it's Stasi, and today I am going to talk about some recent reads. I'm going to talk about the books I read in the first quarter of 2020, so January, February, March. I didn't actually read a single book in February, probably you know, work and moving house contributed to that, but I do still have, I believe, 8 books to talk about today. And we have some really inconsistent lighting because it's cloudy, but I keep getting spurts of sun. Anyway, so I've got my trusty Goodreads so I don't forget anything, and I think I just got makeup all over my phone as well, so I'm clearly having a good day. But 8 books to talk about, let's just get right into it. Actually, everything I read during this period was from the library, a mix of audiobooks, ebooks, and physical books, but all from the library. So, the first thing I read during this time, was Shadow Black by Sebastian de Castell. I listened to it on audiobook, and the thing I really enjoy about these books, because this is the second book in a series, the first one being Spellslinger, is actually the audiobook narrator. He does a really good job of bringing the story to life. He does different voices and everything, and I love these audiobooks. It's probably the best audiobook I've ever listened to, and like, I'm someone who generally really struggles with audiobooks and doesn't like them very often, so that's really saying something. In Spellslinger, we followed a boy who was part of this kind of magician society. People had magic, and he was struggling with the fact he didn't seem to have very strong magic, and in this society you end up basically being treated like slaves if that's the case, and he came from a very powerful family, so he was kind of trying to wiggle his way around that by lying and scheming and things like that. So this second book then follows on his story after the first one. You've also got an interesting woman who comes along in the first book, and there's also an animal companion who is very feisty. And yeah, it's really the audiobooks I think that make the experience of these for me. Story-wise, I didn't like this second one quite as much, didn't find it as engaging, but it's just a lot of fun to listen to, so I did give that 4 out of 5. The next thing I read was Spinning Silver. I'm losing the ability to communicate because of being stuck in my house not talking to anyone. But the next thing I read was Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, and this is a fairy tale-esque story that is drawing ideas from like Rumpelstiltskin, and you're following several women really throughout it, whose stories all kind of intertwine in various ways, including the woman who can spin silver into gold. This was a really beautifully written book, and it's quite slow, but I did find it interesting. I think I gave this 4 out of 5 as well. Yes, I gave this 4 out of 5. It's one of those books that because it's slow, it can feel like it's dragging at points, but overall it was still interesting and well written, and I did enjoy it. Next thing I read was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I actually read my very first thriller last year and found that it's actually a genre I really enjoy, so I've been reading a bunch since, and this one in particular, there is a woman who is hired to be a nanny and a live-in nanny in this house that has a lot of fancy dancy technology in it and things like that, and there's some weird things going on with the house and with the girls she's looking after. And I found this overall, like, I was really gripped by this story and was really enjoying it overall. It's just the ending that let me down. Without spoiling anything, it was just wrapped up really quickly and wrapped up kind of in a short letter rather than actually seeing anything that was happening. It was just overall quite unsatisfying. So it's again something I gave 4 out of 5 stars. So it definitely was not a bad reading month, January. But yeah, it's just that the ending left me really unsatisfied, but I was really gripped otherwise, and I want to continue reading thrillers because I've been enjoying them so much. Next thing I read was The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. Now, I didn't really like The Cruel Prince and the Wicked King, but I was interested enough to see how it ended, especially since it's obviously something that everyone has talked about quite a lot. So I did decide to pick this up, and in a strange turn of events, I ended up giving it 4 stars. Now, I don't know whether it's just that I read this at a time that maybe I needed to. Like maybe I just needed an easy, fun read, which is kind of what these are. They're just easy reads, and I did really enjoy it and got quite absorbed into it. I think the other thing that The Cruel Prince suffered from for me is that I read it right after reading Nevernight, which I loved, and so going from that to The Cruel Prince I think also hurt it in my own experience because it was a bit of a step down. But I did really enjoy it. It's obviously the 3rd book in a trilogy, so what can you say? But you know, most people have heard about this trilogy by now. It's a young adult fae fantasy. I still think that all the characters are awful. Everyone other than the like human girlfriend, I can't remember her name, the one with pink hair. She is the only redeemable character in like that entire series. They're awful, but I had a good time reading it, I guess. Then I read a romance. I read Well Met by Jen DeLuca. And this was the first thing in January that I actually rated it a 3, because overall I felt quite underwhelmed. Again, romance is another genre that I really started reading last year particularly, and found it's another genre I really enjoy. But this one I did feel underwhelmed by this one. It's a romance that's set alongside a Ren fair, and you're following these 2 characters where this man and this woman who really don't get along in day to day, but then within the Ren fair where they're kind of playing parts, his character is quite flirty with hers and all of those kind of things. So that's kind of, that's the base for it. And I actually don't really remember what about this story I particularly felt so meh about, because 3 stars for me is really a meh rating, like it was okay, or generally. And I don't, yeah, and I guess that's another thing, like a few months down the track, if I don't really have strong feelings or thoughts about a book, then obviously it was just an okay read for me. I just remember feeling about it. It was okay, but yeah. Next thing I read was Circe by Madeline Miller. I didn't even give a rating to this book because I think I actually forgot to shelve it until like months after I read it. But it was actually the last book I read in January, and it was another kind of slow and beautifully written story, obviously following Circe, so it's a reimagining of this witch figure from Greek mythology. I don't know whether I've ever mentioned on here before that I actually studied classics in uni, so Greek mythology and ancient Greece and Rome in general is something I'm very interested in and do know a decent amount about. So this book was really interesting from that perspective of seeing how these myths that I am largely familiar with were reimagined and used within this story. And I was really enjoying this, especially because of that aspect, but it is, as I mentioned, it is quite a slow and lyrical read. So it's beautifully written, but quite near the end, I started really feeling like it had gone on too long, and I don't think I loved how it was wrapped up at the end either. I don't know what about it, and by that point I was starting to lose interest as well. Overall, like, beautifully written, interesting to see how these myths have been reimagined. There were a lot of interesting things going on. I just felt like it dragged near the end and was a bit about the ending itself, but would still recommend, especially if you're interested in Greek mythology. So then, yep, February came along, didn't read anything, but I did move house, so that was something. And then in March, I read 2 books. I listened to an audiobook and read 1 ebook because again, I was still busy with work and moving house. And so the one novel I read was The Whisper Man by, is it Alex North? Whisper Man by Alex North. And this was another thriller. This is another one I didn't rate because I wasn't sure how I felt about it. In this one, we're following a man and his son who move into a town, and this town has a lot of kind of dark history around it. Particularly, there was a child serial killer who is now in jail, and children start going missing again, and in a very similar way to what was happening when this original Whisper Man was around. And obviously he's locked up now, so it can't be him, but someone's doing something. And you've also got this hint throughout the novel of, is there something supernatural going on? Which I don't think I mentioned, but the turn of the key was a bit like that too. It's like, is it not? And I did overall mostly enjoy this and was mostly engaged, but I think in terms of all the thrillers I've read over the past like 6 months, because I read my first thriller late last year, so less than 6 months even, it's probably one of my least favorite. I still enjoyed it and was mostly engaged, and I don't really know what it is that holds me off from having loved it. Yeah, I just felt a little bit okay about it, but I still enjoyed it overall, and I want to keep reading thrillers. So the last thing I listened to was actually like a self-help book, and I'm gonna need to bring up the title because it's one of those wordy ones. 15 Minutes to Happiness, Easy Everyday Exercises to Help You Be the Best You Can Be by Richard Nichols. So this is, you know, exactly what it sounds like. My mental health this year has not been fantastic, so this is one of the things that I guess made me want to pick something like this up. And also, I like having audiobooks on sometimes, like driving to and from work. Obviously not doing that at the moment. But, so exactly what it sounds like, it's basically going through a list of strategies to help bring happiness to your life, and also goes through a bit of explanation of like why things are certain ways and why you should be doing certain things. The guy who wrote it is actually a psychologist, I believe, and he does bring in kind of personal accounts and experiences with patients. And overall, I thought it was really interesting, brought up some really valid and helpful points. The problem I had with this was that it started to have this focus on weight loss that made me really uncomfortable. And like, obviously, like, he's coming from a place where this is an issue that many people have actually raised with him in his career. And so obviously it is something that affects people and a reason people do feel unhappy with themselves. But the focus on that it became, like, even when he was talking about unrelated things later on, it often then would keep looping back to this weight loss idea, and it made me really uncomfortable because like, it's something that makes people unhappy, but then like part of that, I feel like part of the issue though is that the issue is more society telling people that they should lose weight rather than how they should lose weight, because that was part of this book. It was like giving strategies to help you lose weight. So that made me uncomfortable. But other than that, I still don't regret listening to it. So that's everything I read in the first quarter. I have read a few books since then, so I suppose I'll have more to talk about in the future. Tell me what you've read recently and have really loved, because obviously I didn't like super love everything that I've read so far. Didn't rate anything 5 stars, although I'm not someone who rates things 5 stars very often. I've mentioned briefly before, but like, my rating system's generally like 1 is objectively an awful book, 2 maybe not objectively the worst thing ever, but I really didn't like it, 3 is like, it was okay, 4, I really liked it, 5, I freaking loved it. It was a really good book. Or sometimes even I rate things a 4 star if I super loved it, but I think like, it's like a trashy love, like maybe I shouldn't love it as much as I do because it's not objectively that great. That's kind of my rating system. But tell me something that you have read recently and really loved, or have you read any of these books and how do you feel about them? I don't know whether the Caddies will ever be coming back. I feel a little... I don't know how I feel about this, but it's a thing that happened today. It's, isolation is driving us all to do things. Yeah. Stay safe, stay sane, Stasi out.